Michael Geyer of the German Aerospace Center. My name is Jonathan Walters. I'm a visiting fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. And what we're talking to Michael about today is how Germany plans to phase out coal without losing all the coal jobs, which obviously is a topic of great interest to many other countries that produce coal or use coal. And he's talking specifically about how you can potentially repower coal-fired power plants with something other than coal. So in a moment, I'll ask Michael to make a short presentation to explain the concept. Some of you participated with us in a webinar on this topic about a month ago, and we thought there were so many questions in that webinar, it would be good to do a more in-depth interview. If you have questions during this webinar, you'll see on your screen that there's a question and answer, a Q&A box. So please send in your questions as soon as you have them. And then after Michael has done his brief presentation, I will pose some of the questions to him. So we'll go for about half an hour or so based on your questions coming in and some questions that I have for Michael to explain various things. So Michael, maybe you want to go ahead with your presentation and then we'll take it from there.
Yes, Jonathan, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, you are online. Thank you very much here to coming back after the first webinar we had some weeks ago or joining us new. Indeed, the subject here is basically about how giving a second life to coal plants and how to assist to decarbonize those plants. And such is now, let's say, under study in Germany, since Germany had some weeks ago, end of February, published the report of their coal commission to exit from coal by 2038. So, Araceli, please, the next slide. Next, yeah. So this has already now become public in several articles. And next slide, please. And the background here is basically that here, if you look at these pictures, first of all, you normally do not think that this is Germany. You may know this by Oktoberfest from Munich or by the Berlin attractions. But this is a lignite pit close to Cologne, near to the French border at Jülich. And here, basically in this area, are some 1,000 megawatts of lignite coal plants. The lignite coal is extracted here, and on conveyor belt, it gets just in time directly into the power plants. And the idea, please press next, is that here by 2038, here all these plants should be shut down. Today, Germany has 46,000 megawatts of coal plants, of which 7,000 will be shut down by 2022, and additional 16,000 by 2030. So then by 2030, we would have half of the 46 gigawatt shut down, and the rest to be the remaining 23 gigawatt to be shut down by 2038. Next slide. Now, of course, we do not want that by then the lights are turning off in Germany, and there will be no light and no cold beer in the evening. So what will be the replacement? Because just keep in mind that by 2023, also Germany is shutting down all the nuclear power. And the idea is to increase renewables in Germany from currently 40% of the gross power production of the 400 terawatt hour, which Germany is generating per year, to 65% in 2030 and to 85% by 2050. Now, since the wind blows when he likes, and since the sun at least shines from sunrise to sunset, but by guarantee not after sunset, such conversion will need to introduce in the German power system lots of storage that will guarantee the dispatchability of power and the coverage of the demand curve at any hour of the day with close to 100% security. Now, what here at the DLR we have, and this will need for the 65% by 2030, some 7,000 megawatt of new storage capacity that will be able, let's say, to convert the variable renewable power into dispatchable power. And by 2050, some 25,000 megawatts of storage. Now, today, when we talk of storage, everybody is thinking of putting big batteries close to the wind parks or at the substations or at the PV plants. But what we have here proposed and developed at the DLR is the idea of using existing coal plants and giving them a second life. And this is by adding thermal storage to those coal plants which can use part of this infrastructure. Next slide, please. So what you do here is that you would add to an existing coal plant. And what is a coal plant? A coal plant is basically a steam cycle which has a coal boiler. And instead of making the steam by burning the coal, here the idea is that you have thermal storage tanks, which are molten salts, high temperature molten salts. So you have a high temperature tank at 565 degrees centigrade and a low temperature tank at some 300 degrees centigrade. And with the heat exchangers, you can then produce high pressure steam like the coal boiler would do, and you can continue using the same infrastructure and basically also the same O&M team, and so maintain a large portion of the coal power plant's job in its second life. Now, the big question is, how do you heat the molten salt? And this technology is mature and has over 10 years of experience in the concentrating solar power plants, where the salt is heated by the mirrors or by of the heliostats or of the parabolic troughs. And here, instead of heating it by the mirrors of heliostats and troughs, we would heat it by an electric resistance heater. And this electric resistance heater would receive its electricity from renewable electricity from the grid, like from solar or from wind in the German grid. And you will ask, is there solar power in the German grid? And you will be surprised that in Germany there are approximately 46,000 megawatts of PV, which is 10 times the PV capacity that is installed, for example, in Spain. And there are some 90,000 megawatts of wind. And there, by 2030, this capacity will increase so that there will be sufficient renewable power, excess power, or curtailed power that can be used to charge the storage. Now, this would be, let's say, the beginning, and here in Germany with the DLR and together with a German electricity company, RWE, we have launched a pilot project. We are now in the phase of the feasibility study. And in this first stage, here, the salts would be heated just by resistance heaters, which can be done close to 100%. And so the reconversion would be with an efficiency of the steam cycle, some 42%, so that we would have a round trip charging and discharging efficiency of 40%, which then here we are now, let's say, at the DLR in the build-up of an institute for heat pumps. And this could be then increased, next slide, by the introduction of heat pumps to charge the electricity. So we could increase here the coefficient of performance during charging to some 120%, so that the total charge-discharge electricity would grow to 50%. And next slide. Next slide, please. Back, sorry. And back, okay, thank you. And so here you find the first announcement of this project. If you go to the webpage of RWE, and here you see, let's say, a schematic of how this would look like. You see there on the gray block is the existing coal plant with its turbines, with its boiler, which is cooling, with its grid connection. And on the green plates, you see what would be added in this pilot project, the hot tank and the cold tank, and then there would be the molten salt steam generator and the resistance heater to run this on. Next slide. So please, put all the text. So what is the advantage of using this molten salt, for example, in comparison with the lithium batteries? First of all, here there is a very important, I think, social political aspect that with this thermal storage here, these coal plants can have a second life, and that, let's say, an important amount of the jobs there can be conserved. The second issue is that I have been on several conferences now with lenders where they just say lenders today are comfortable with the track record of various 1,000 megawatts of thermal storage capacity that have been operating then now over 10 years, so that they consider this as a mature technology which they would finance, while, let's say, on the lithium side, everything is still very new. Lenders are not yet comfortable, is missing track record, etc. The second thing is that the lifetime of such a thermal storage with molten salt basically is, I wouldn't say is infinite, but it is designed for over 30 years. And it is, let's say, environmentally very friendly. The salts, they are basically fertilizers. They are non-toxic, and they can be designed for a long lifetime. While here with the lithium batteries, currently lifetimes is some 10 years, and let's say later the materials must be recycled. But again, I don't think that there is, let's say, a religious technical solution that it only shall be thermal storage. I believe that the electrochemical storage is good for the short time grid regulation, grid stabilization from the 15 milliseconds to, let's say, to the 2 hours, while here the thermal storage is ideal for the longer load shifting, I would say from 4 to 6 hours upwards. Next slide. So the question is that for what countries would this be suitable? What would be the cost? The first issue is, I mean, in Germany, if there is a political decision to decarbonize by exiting from coal. So there will not be the question whether to have a plant with thermal storage that is charged by renewable electricity is more expensive than producing the electricity by coal. Because what needs to be looked for is, once you have a political decision that you have a CO2 emission-free power generation, then you must look for the least cost solution to guarantee the security of supply over the 24 hours, 365 days per year. And I guess that if you make there, let's say, the detailed cost analysis, you need to add storage. And then the big question is, what kind of storage do you add, and what will be the least cost solution? You see, if you now go through the media, there are other countries thinking of this. Here's an article of the United States, of Wyoming, and other countries which are, let's say, predestined, I think, to analyze such a solution. Next slide. Would be Chile. And in Chile, I mean, the real interesting thing is, I just have been 2 weeks ago in the desert of Atacama and had the privilege to visit the mines of the lithium and the mines of the nitrates, which are the solar salts. And what is the real interesting thing is that both materials basically come from the same place, from the same matrix, and that is the big Salar de Atacama, the desert of Atacama. And it is just and they are extracted by putting water into this salt mine, and then feeding this into huge evaporation ponds. And then depending on your evaporation process, you can get lithium or you can get solar salts. And you can even get lithium and potassium, which is one part of the solar salt. So basically, Earth gives us both materials in one big desert. And so let's say from there, Chile is a predestined country to also look into the use of the thermal energy storage and in the conversion of their coal plants. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so what do you see here? Chile is the country which has the best direct normal and global horizontal irradiation on Earth. This is the picture of the direct normal irradiation, but also the global horizontal is world best, basically because it is very high altitude, very clear atmosphere, and no clouds. But you also see that on the left that, and this is the area where it's the copper mining, and that is the area where there is the lithium and the salitre mining and the nitrate mining. But most of the electricity production there still comes from coal plants. And so, but this coal is not local. Coal must be shipped there from international markets. It is relatively expensive. Generation of coal electricity there costs something like $60–70 per megawatt hour, while the generation of solar power there costs below $20 per megawatt hour. So converting such coal plants into storage plants and charging these with the local solar power would give, let's say, probably a very economically attractive solution for decarbonization and still provide 24 hours electricity, 365 days a year for the mining industry. Next slide. Oh, I think that was then the last slide. Okay, so that basically is here the suggestion, a very simple idea: combine mature thermal storage technology, retrofit this into existing coal plants, and give coal plants then a second life, and heat this up in the first stage with electric resistance, and develop meanwhile heat pumps to improve this efficiency.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much for that great brief explanation of the concept. I'm sure there are lots of questions that I'll come to in a moment. But if I understand the concept correctly, basically what you're saying is when countries are using coal for in power plants, they've got, let's say they've got three choices. One is to just carry on doing that with
Exactly.
whatever the economic implications are, and coal is becoming expensive relative to other technologies, whatever the environmental implications are, or whatever environmental obligations they might have. That's one option, just carry on, business as usual. Which, as you're saying, in the case of Germany, that a decision has already been taken that it can't be business as usual forever. But you know, it's at least in principle, it's an option, business as usual. Second option is you just say, well, okay, we shut down this power plant, we build some other power plant somewhere else with some other technology. We then have lots of choices. It's flexible. There's all sorts of technology options and so on. And the third possibility is we say, well, you know, in a coal-fired power plant, even if we're not going to use coal, there are some of the physical assets that still have some life left in them, still have some value left in them. And if we can convert this power plant to using something else, something renewable with the kind of technologies you're talking about, particularly the storage technology, this could work because the combination of technologies, you're combining mature technologies. These are not new things. The combination is something a little bit new, so you have to figure out the technical details, and you have to figure out exactly what's going to cost. Because if your choice is, well, let's build a new power plant with all the flexibility that you have with that, rather than doing this integration of a different technology into an existing coal-fired power plant, the relative costs need to be looked at. Now, I think what you're saying is that in the case of Germany and of other countries, that process is underway, looking at what exactly it would cost. So if somebody says to you, okay, in Germany, what exactly is it going to cost compared to doing something else? You're not yet in a position to give a 100% answer to that, but also you can give part of an answer because the technologies that you're combining are known technologies. So there may be some margin of error in your estimate, but you'll be able to give part of an answer. And in other countries that want to look at this or are looking at this, somebody could give an answer to that too. So probably what you would recommend is, in each case of a country that is thinking about this as a way of moving gradually or quickly out of coal, would be do some sort of feasibility study of what this would cost in the case of your country. Is that a reasonable summary of what you're
Absolutely, because as you well conclude, the costs for the thermal storage are pretty well known. They are, I would say, around some $30 per kilowatt hour thermal of the storage system which you add, and then you have to look. I mean, what would be, let's say, the cost of integrating it into the coal plant and make your analysis. But this will be case by case, because let's say the value of the coal plant and the retrofit, that will depend on its age, on its location, on the permits, etc. But I think it's a very straightforward exercise to do, let's say, case by case for coal plants, a feasibility study, and look what would be the economics of that. Because as you well concluded, this is mature technology.
Okay, so thank you. I'm seeing a number of questions are coming in quite fast. But the ones I just looked at, there are a few of them that are asking if you can give some numbers. I mean, numbers in euros, dollars, whatever, money numbers, for what kind of costs we might be talking about. Now, realizing that that's case specific, it's country specific, it's location specific, and so on. Are there any kind of orders of magnitude?
Yeah, I mean, if you consider a round trip efficiency of 40% and the thermal kilowatt hour costs you 30, so the 30 divided by 25 is something like 70. So it costs you $70, the storage of the electric kilowatt hour. And this means if you want to have if you want to have 100 megawatts, 10 hours, that is 1,000 gigawatt hours, then I guess the storage would cost you some $70 million if I didn't make a wrong calculation, just the storage. Now, the integration into the coal plant itself, this is something, yeah, there you cannot give general numbers. That is something which the utilities and the owners of the coal plant need to determine themselves. But let's add to it another, I don't know, 20%, 30%, then you talk of 100 million for 100 megawatt, 10 hours.
So the basic, if I understand correctly, I'm not an engineer, but if I understand correctly, the basic thing that you would need to invest in order to do the integration, apart from the storage, you'd presumably need to change the boiler in the power plant to be able to use something other.
Exactly. Basically, with your storage, you introduce a boiler, and this boiler basically is a molten salt to water steam heat exchanger. And this has a preheater, this has an evaporator, and this has a superheater and a reheater. And it will produce this at the same steam conditions, normally like some 550, 540 degrees centigrade at some 140 to 160 bars.
Okay. Now, in Germany specifically, can you tell us how far advanced this concept is in terms of the analysis, when there will be implementation, when there will be results from the implementation? Take us a little bit through the timetable.
Yeah, basically, we are now in the phase of the feasibility study. The partners, DLR and RWE, have committed their contribution and have also received from the state of North Rhine-Westphalia financial support to do now, let's say, in the feasibility study, all the detailed engineering, prepare in the end the terms for a tender, then to construct this plant, model the whole thing, and then look with what kind of operation this would have and what kind of cost and let's say dispatching modes the project would have. This phase is has just started and lasts some 12 months, and then there will come the tender phase and the construction phase. Construction of this should be not more than 18 months. So basically within 30 months, 2.5 years from now, this should be working and should be operating.
Ah, okay. So once it's constructed, so a couple of years from now or so, once it's constructed, you will have a very precise idea of the capital cost of the conversion, obviously.
Yes, but let's say if other countries or other owners of coal plants are interested, let's say we may support, let's say, in a feasibility study. Again, as I say, this is existing technology. I mean, the only new, not the new technology, but the new application are these large resistance heaters. So in the CSP plants, they have not been applied. The DLR is also planning some kind of qualification tests of these. But then the rest is like if you study, let's say, for a coal plant to add a gas boiler. I mean, there you do the preliminary engineering, you look for bids, and the same thing you can do with this molten salt storage technology, because again, there are many competitive firms who have constructed such storage, and where one can analyze this.
Right. In other words, it's you need to do the studies, you need to do a feasibility study and so on, but the cost element, the cost of each of the components is pretty well known, because all these things are, you know, out there in
Exactly.
the market. It's not new technology for the most part.
Exactly.
And so you can do a pretty reliable feasibility.
Exactly. And I mean, today, many utilities are now, let's say, in the phase of looking in what they will invest the next 10 years. And most of them go for renewable. They are looking to the storage options, pumped hydro or batteries. And this is just to get on their screen this additional option to look whether it makes sense for them or not to use thermal storage and retrofit existing assets they have, if this makes economic sense, and it could.
Right, right. So we're getting some questions coming in. Okay, so here's one question. Is solar salt for mining production sufficient to move away from coal around the world? I think what that's asking is, we've all heard about supply constraints on lithium. Is there some sort of supply constraint on molten salt?
Well, I think the first thing is, independently, if there is or not, I think we have to move out of coal. So it will not depend if we have sufficient salts if we move out of coal. The question is what the solution is. I mean, first of all, the solar salts are fertilizers, and fertilizers worldwide have, let's say, enormous resources. Here we have many in the Atacama Desert, but potassium is also, let's say, there in other parts of the world, and you can also synthesize these salts. I don't have numbers, what are the worldwide resources, but I think that they are pretty more than there's in lithium. And in general, I think what we will have to think, we will probably need lots of the lithium for the e-mobility to make batteries for our future cars. So I think that we will need all kinds of the storage materials which are there on the world, and not just say, okay, we don't tap the nitrates, we only tap the lithium. I don't think that we can afford that.
Yeah, no, I agree, particularly that the comparative advantage of lithium is that it's very lightweight, which means you're going to use as much of it as possible in transport, not in
exactly,
not in the power sector where the weight is not an advantage. So somebody's asking about the workers in a power plant. If you convert from coal to this using storage and renewables and so on, what does that do to the workforce that's needed in a power plant? Not taking into account the workforce in the coal mine, obviously, if that's an issue, but just in the power plant, does it change the workforce?
I don't think really, because if you have a power plant, I mean, the workforce starts with the security around the plant, and then you have the operators, let's say the chiefs of shift, and you have the maintenance people. And basically, I mean, you keep running the steam cycle, you keep running all the transformers, etc. And what you add here is you add another kind of steam generators, but it is thermal steam generator technology for which, let's say, these operators and maintenance people are prepared from their education. They will need to be trained, let's say, like if they would need to be trained if there was a gas boiler. And the same thing, let's say, with the tanks, etc. So basically, it continues to require the same qualification of, let's say, thermal technicians and thermal operation and maintenance engineers, like for the normal power plant.
Right. So in other words, a country that does this can at least save the jobs in the power plants. They
Exactly.
may be able to save the coal mining jobs if they have them, but at least in
Exactly.
the coal power plants, they can save the jobs
Exactly.
by doing this.
Exactly.
So you've talked about the German initiative. Are you aware yet of any initiative at the level of the European Commission about this, or is the idea that as Germany progresses with it, then the European Commission will obviously observe what's happening, follow it, and maybe start disseminating the information to other countries? I mean, what's your expectation?
Yes, I think I mean, apart from the fact that I think in the horizon 2020 there is eligibility for, let's say, proposing these things, but I am not aware, let's say, of any specific, let's say, program, action, regulation at the European Commission level. And so the idea is also in parallel to do this feasibility study, disseminate, inform, and start into a dialogue with the European Commission, and make let's say the world aware of this option.
Right. Okay. And then there's a more technical question. Would a power plant running like this, with the storage, be more flexible in its operation than a coal-fired power plant was?
Yes, yes, I guess so. And even in the transition period, because let's say in the idea of the German plant, the idea is just add, let's say it's a 300 megawatt plant probably. And in this pilot, one would add a 50 megawatt storage, up to a 50 megawatt storage. So it would not have the complete power of the plant. And so far, let's say coal plants have a certain minimum load, which is depending. Some of them only can reduce to 40%. And so instead of stopping the coal plant even could use its own electricity to charge that storage and avoid, let's say, an inefficient stopping of the plant. Now, all this, and the audience will tell, yeah, but then it is reconverting only at 40%. This all will be easily determined, studied by the Excel to look if it makes sense or not, if the losses of, let's say, stopping and doing a cold start again are higher than using the electricity and charging the storage and keep the plant running. So I think such a thermal storage can add even to the coal plant today flexibility. And later, of course, you can have this same thing, running the coal plant at the steam cycle at the minimum load, and charge excess there in the storage. So this definitely would add flexibility.
Yeah, right. Okay. So we're unfortunately running out of time, but let me ask you one last question. So let's look at a sort of hypothetical. If the German pilot project proves successful, both economically and operationally, technically, would you like to make a prediction of how quickly that technology could spread to not just other plants in Germany, but to other countries? For example, do you think that Germany would then be comfortable stopping the use of coal before the target date that the Coal Commission has recommended? And do you think that other countries may quite rapidly take on this technology? What's your expectation if the German pilot project is successful?
Well, let's first revisit one personal experience I had in my life, because I introduced molten salt thermal storage in the worldwide first in the Andasol plant in Spain.
Mhm.
That was around, well, the ideas came around 2000, financial close was around 2006, and then it was constructed into 8. And I initially thought people will look until it is constructed, and then which would take 2 years, and then look 2 years of operation if it works, and then they will follow with my plan. No, in parallel, while Andasol 1 was, let's say, still in construction, nobody knew whether it worked or not. In Spain, like 50 plants were developed, and in parallel, I think by today, 20 plants were constructed, not waiting if it worked or not. So what I would see here is even that the here, since in Germany, let's say the permitting, etc., is lower, I even could say, since this is, let's say, it's a public technology, it is mature, one can analyze it, that, and it just wasn't on the screen of the decision makers, of the coal plant owners, that probably many in the due diligence on what to do with their coal plant, they will analyze it and they will come to a conclusion it makes sense or it doesn't make sense. And if they come to the conclusion that it makes sense, then this may develop in parallel without waiting until we have the first results in Germany.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And in addition, you know, what you were talking about with CSP in Spain was a new investment. In this case, you're talking about governments that will want to save jobs in
Exactly.
the plants, and somebody comes along to them and says, well, here's a way of saving those jobs, but without having to continue to use coal. Okay, it's pretty attractive. You might find that they're ready to move forward.
Absolutely.
Without waiting for, you know, the results of pilot projects, particularly because what are you piloting exactly when you're using mature technologies? Yes, you're learning something, but what you're learning is, in a sense, you're learning details. You're not learning the big.
Yeah, again, what is the pilot here? Apart from that needs to be quantified, but that is a fast step, the resistance heaters. I mean, the rest is not a pilot. It is running since 10 years. The pilot is here that the utility makes itself familiar, and its technicians who haven't seen these plants, and they make familiar themselves that this works. But it is not, in the sense, a technical pilot where you have to demonstrate that the technology works.
Yeah, it's sort of a bit more like a training program.
So to speak, yes. To speak, yes.
Okay, well, I think we've run out of time. In fact, we've overrun, which is great because it shows the level of interest in this, you know, quite hot topic. So people will receive your PowerPoint. If they have more questions for you, maybe they can send them either to you or through
Absolutely.
ATA to you. I think you're going to find a lot of interest because I'm seeing the people who registered for this webinar, participating in this webinar from a lot of different countries, most of them coal using and sometimes coal producing countries. Yeah. They've obviously, you know, got this on their mind. So thank you very much for your wonderful presentation and answering the questions. Thank you to everybody for participating in this webinar, this interview, and have a good rest of your day, whatever's left of it, depending on what time zone you're in, because you're all over the world. Thanks to everybody. Okay.
So, Jonathan, thank you, and thanks to everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.